Welcome to Mysteries Beneath Earth, and thank you for joining this quiet exploration. Here, curiosity is not rushed, and questions are not treated as a race, but as companions for reflection. Perhaps you are listening at the end of a long day, letting your thoughts unwind before sleep, or maybe you are simply searching for a different way of seeing the familiar world around you. Wherever you are, I am glad you are here. For most of our journeys, we have looked down into the deep rock and the cold, dark water. But tonight, we will do the opposite. We will follow a mystery that invites us to drift up, away from the ground beneath our feet, past the thin, gentle veil of the atmosphere, and into the one place that holds even more secrets than the deep. We are going to the silent, cold, and perfect blackness of space. Here, the depths are not measured in meters, but in light years, and the silence is not just a lack of sound, but a true, perfect vacuum. For this new journey, we will not be listening to the rock. We will be listening to the sky. Because if the Baltic anomaly is a mystery of what lies beneath, this is a mystery of who might be looking down from above. It is a thought that is perhaps as old as human consciousness. The act of looking up at the night sky, at that vast, dark ceiling, and feeling a sense of wonder or perhaps a sense of being watched. We see the moon, our pale, familiar companion. We see the planets, our wandering neighbors, and in the last 70 years, we have filled that darkness with our own creations. A swarm of satellites, thousands of them, our busy, noisy electronic eyes, chattering to each other in a language of radio waves. They are ours. We know what they are. We put them there. But what if there is one that we didn't put there? What if there is an object dark, silent, and cold that was there long before our first rocket ever cleared the atmosphere? What if there is an object following us on our orbit, a quiet, unknown companion that has been doing so for 13,000 years? This is the story, or perhaps the legend, of the Black Knight satellite. It is not a new story. It is not a simple, single event like the Baltic anomaly. It is something else. It is a constellation of a myth. It is a collection of disparate, strange, and seemingly unconnected events, anomalies from different decades, all stitched together by time and human curiosity to form the image of a single impossible object, a sentinel in our orbit. The narrative, the what if that captures the imagination, is this: that an intelligent extraterrestrial probe was sent to our planet 13,000 years ago. An age so distant it predates all of human civilization, all of our writing, all of our cities, all of our gods. A time when we were just emerging hunter-gatherers at the end of the last ice age, and that this object was not an invader. It was an observer, a silent, patient watcher, placed in a high, stable polar orbit to witness the slow, patient unfolding of our species, from scattered nomads to a civilization that could, finally, look up and see it. And it has been there ever since, circling, watching, a single, dark, forgotten eye in the void. This is, of course, a breathtaking claim. It is the very essence of science fiction. And yet, the legend persists, because the dots that form this constellation are not just rumors. They are, in themselves, real and documented scientific and historical mysteries. Our task in this quiet exploration is not to leap to conclusions. It is to drift calmly through each of these stories one by one. We must separate the fact from the legend, the signal from the noise. We will find that this story is not just about a potential object in space. It is about us. It is about our transition from a species that could only look at the sky to a species that could listen to it and finally touch it. The story of the Black Knight begins, strangely enough, not with a telescope, but with a radio. It begins with the whispers. The first dot in the drawing of the Black Knight was perceived, perhaps in 1899. In Colorado Springs, the genius and perhaps mystic Nikola Tesla was conducting his massive experiments, sending colossal bolts of lightning into the Earth, trying to turn the planet itself into a transmitter. He built a receiver of such immense sensitivity that he believed he could listen to the rhythms of the planet itself. And in the high, thin, electric air of that lab, in the silence between his own man-made thunder, he began to receive signals. Rhythmic, intelligent, repeating pulses. He was, by all accounts, a man who knew the language of the Earth's electrical field. He knew what lightning sounded like. He knew what solar flares sounded like. And these signals, he insisted, were not that. They were not from Earth. They were, he was convinced, from space. He believed with all his heart that they were coming from Mars. He had, he thought, made first contact. The world in 1899 was not ready for this. His claims were dismissed as the eccentricities of a genius. But Tesla never wavered. He died believing he had been the first to hear a voice from the stars. For a long time, this was just a curious footnote in his life. The first dot was drawn, but it was lonely and mostly forgotten. Then, a generation later, came the second dot. This one was not from a lone genius, but from radio operators and scientists all over the world. In the 1920s, they began to notice something just as baffling: long-delayed echoes, or LDEs. The phenomenon was simple and physically impossible to explain. An operator would send a radio signal from Earth, a simple ping, and sometimes, inexplicably, the echo of that signal would return seconds later. Not milliseconds, which would be a simple, predictable bounce off the Earth's ionosphere, but long, impossible delays. 3 seconds, 8 seconds, 15 seconds, sometimes even longer. This was a real physical phenomenon. It was not a quirk. It was measured, but it made no sense. A radio wave travels at the speed of light. In 3 seconds, it can travel to the moon and back. In 8 seconds, it can go far beyond the moon. What, in the empty, silent void of space, was holding that signal for so long? What was the tape recorder in the sky? The second dot was drawn, adding to the mystery. Then came the 1950s, the dawn of the space age, and the profound global paranoia of the Cold War. In 1954, we must remember, this was before Sputnik 1 stunned the world. Humans had not officially put anything into orbit. The sky was still considered empty of our own creations. It was in that year that newspapers, including the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and Time magazine, ran sensational and very real stories. They reported that the U.S. Air Force had detected 2 unknown objects in Earth orbit. They were dark satellites, phantoms. No one knew what they were or who had put them there. A chilling realization rippled through the military. They were not ours. And if they weren't ours, they must be the Soviets. But the Soviets at that time did not have the technology. And if they weren't the Soviets, whose were they? The story caused a brief public panic, and then, just as quickly, it was officially silenced, dismissed. The third dot was drawn, this time in the ink of military secrecy and Cold War fear. So, by the time we were even ready to launch our first rockets, there was already a history, a file, a legend of whispers from space, impossible echoes, and phantom satellites, waiting in the dark. The stage was set for the Black Knight. The stage was set for the Black Knight. And then, in 1957, humanity itself stepped onto that stage decisively and with a roar. The Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1. The sky was no longer an abstract, dark ceiling. It was suddenly a place we could touch. That first simple, repeating beep 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 from Sputnik was, in its own way, an answer to Tesla. It was a human signal from a human object in our own orbit. We had finally joined the conversation. The space race had begun, and with it, a new, intense, and terrified era of sky watching. We were not just looking for stars anymore. We were looking for them, the Soviets, and they were looking for us. Both sides built massive, powerful, space-fence radar systems designed to track every single object, every piece of debris, every new satellite that entered orbit. The sky, which had been a place of quiet wonder, was now a strategic battlefield. And it was in this new, tense environment that the fourth and perhaps most significant dot of the Black Knight legend was drawn. The year was 1960. Both the United States and the Soviet Union were launching and failing at a frantic pace. They were putting small, simple satellites into equatorial orbits, orbits that are easiest to achieve, that follow the Earth's spin. And then, in February 1960, the new U.S. North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD radar systems detected something. It was a satellite. It was dark. It was not theirs. And it was not, they believed, Soviet. The object's orbit was the true anomaly. It was not in an easy equatorial orbit. It was in a polar orbit, circling the planet from pole to pole. This was, in 1960, a breathtaking and terrifying technological feat. A polar orbit is difficult to achieve. It requires launching against the Earth's spin, requiring vastly more power. But it is also the perfect orbit for an observer. A satellite in a polar orbit, as the Earth rotates beneath it, will eventually pass over every single point on the planet. It is the ultimate spy. The US military was baffled. They did not have this capability. They did not believe the Soviets did either. So, whose was it? The story leaked. On February 11, 1960, Time magazine ran an article. It spoke of a dark satellite, a phantom, that had been detected, its origin unknown. It was the 1954 story all over again, but this time it was real. It was being tracked. It had an orbit. It had a behavior. The object was estimated to be large, perhaps 15 tons. It was, for a short time, the most terrifying mystery in the world. The military quickly tried to silence the story. They announced, just a few weeks later, that the object had been identified. It was, they claimed, a lost piece of a US Discoverer satellite, a piece of space debris. The explanation was neat. It was tidy, and to many it felt incomplete, felt like a cover-up. The fourth dot was drawn, a dark, heavy circle in a polar orbit. For a decade, this mystery simmered. The 1960s were a blur of activity: the Mercury program, Gemini, the race to the moon. The world was looking forward. But in the 1970s, the dust settled. We had been to the moon. The space race was maturing. And now scientists had time to look back. They had time to look at the old, unsolved files. And one scientist, in particular, was fascinated by the oldest, strangest file of all. Those long-delayed echoes from the 1920s. His name was Duncan Lunnan, a Scottish science writer and astronomer. He looked at the LDE phenomenon, those impossible 3 to 15-second delays, and he asked a simple question: what if the standard explanation, that they were just random bounces off plasma clouds in the magnetosphere, was wrong? What if the tape recorder in the sky was not natural? What if, he thought, the delays were not random at all? What if they were a message? He took the data, the logs from the 1920s operators, charting the specific delay times of these strange, ghostly echoes. And he did what any good analyst would do. He plotted them on a graph. He charted the sequence of the delays one after the other, and he found it. Pattern. It was not noise. It was, he claimed, a clear, unambiguous, intelligent signal. When plotted, the sequence of the delays formed a map. It was a star chart. Lunnan, astonished, worked to identify it. And he did. The map, he claimed, showed the constellation of Epsilon Boötis, a star system in the northern sky. But it was not the sky as it looked in the 1970s. The stars were in the wrong positions. He realized, with a chill, that he was looking at an ancient sky. The map, he calculated, showed the constellation of Epsilon Boötis as it would have appeared from Earth 13,000 years ago. The number was spoken. The core of the myth was born. Lunnan published his findings in 1973 in the journal Spaceflight, a respected publication. He claimed to have decoded the message. It was, he said, a message from an alien probe, a probe from Epsilon Boötis, a probe that had arrived in our orbit 13,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, and had used the LDEs as a way to announce its presence, a hello to the new fledgling species that it had been sent to watch. In one breathtaking stroke, Duncan Lunnan had seemingly connected all the dots. Tesla's signals in 1899, they were the first to hear the probe. The 1920s LDEs, that was the message itself. The 1954 and 1960 dark satellites in polar orbit, that was the probe itself, the Black Knight, the 13,000-year-old sentinel that Lunnan had just identified. The legend was now almost complete. It had a voice. It had a behavior. It had a presence. It had an orbit. And now, thanks to Duncan Lunnan, it had a history, an origin, and an age. All that was missing was a face. All that was missing was a face. And then, in 1998, the legend got one. This is perhaps the most famous, most compelling, and most misleading part of the entire story. It is the final and most powerful dot in the constellation. The Space Shuttle Endeavour on mission STS-88, the very first mission to begin construction of the International Space Station ISS, was in orbit. The astronauts, including future ISS Commander Jerry Ross, were busy. They were maneuvering the new Unity module, attempting to join it with the Russian Zarya module. It was a difficult, high-stakes orbital construction job. During an extravehicular activity, EVA, or spacewalk, a crucial piece of equipment was lost. A thermal blanket, a trunnion pin cover, slipped away from an astronaut and began to drift, tumbling slowly into the void. This is and was a common, if frustrating, occurrence in space. The astronauts photographed the lost object as it drifted away, along with other pieces of orbital debris, as is standard procedure. They documented their lost equipment. And one of these photographs, cataloged by NASA as just one of many, was extraordinary. It showed a strange, black, angular, and deeply unnatural-looking object floating alone against the bright curve of the Earth. It did not look like a blanket. It looked constructed. It was dark, complex, with a strange, almost winged shape. It was, in short, the perfect candidate. The image, found in NASA's own public archives, was seized upon by the burgeoning internet community. This was it. This was the body that matched the voice from the 1970s. This was the dark satellite from the 1960s. This, they claimed, was the Black Knight. The image was explosive. It was not a grainy sonar image from the deep sea. It was not a faint, ambiguous radar blip. It was a high-resolution, full-color photograph taken in orbit by NASA astronauts of a clear, three-dimensional, unidentified object. The legend, which had been a collection of whispers and echoes, now had its face. The story was complete. A 13,000-year-old alien sentinel photographed by the space shuttle. The case for many was closed. And this is where our own quiet exploration must become one of careful, gentle deconstruction. Because this story, this perfect, compelling narrative, is in many ways a beautiful illusion. It is a story created by our own human need to connect the dots, to find the face in the noise. The Black Knight satellite, as a single 13,000-year-old object, does not exist. It is a myth. It is a modern legend, a piece of folklore for the space age. But the dots are real. And the true story, the story of what those dots really were, is in many ways just as fascinating as the legend itself. We must, with the same quiet curiosity, drift back through time and visit each of these dots again. But this time, with the clear light of science and history. Let us begin with the face. The 1998 STS-88 photograph. Is it an alien satellite? The answer unequivocally is no. It is, exactly as the astronauts reported, a thermal blanket. The trunnion pin cover. The object in the photo may not look like a soft, flexible blanket, but that is because our minds are used to how things look on Earth. In the vacuum of space with no air pressure, and in the extreme cold, a multi-layered silver and black, foil-like blanket, designed to be rigid, will tumble and fold in strange, angular, and unnatural-looking ways. The dark and light parts are just the different sides of the blanket. One black, one silver, catching the harsh sunlight as it turns. It is not a solid object. It is a piece of lost, high-tech fabric, crumpled into a shape that our pattern-seeking brains interpret as a ship. NASA has confirmed this. The astronauts who were there have confirmed this. The object's orbit was tracked, and it re-entered and burned up in the atmosphere just a few days later. It was not a 13,000-year-old sentinel. It was quite simply space junk. The face of the Black Knight, the most powerful piece of evidence, is an illusion. A simple piece of lost equipment, misidentified, and elevated to the status of an alien artifact by a world that was primed and ready to find it. This is a simple, mundane explanation, and like the "it's just a rock" theory for the Baltic anomaly, it can feel unsatisfying. It robs us of the wonder. But what of the other, older, more compelling dots? What about Duncan Lunnan and his 13,000-year-old star map from Epsilon Boötis? This surely is harder to dismiss. Here, the story becomes one of retraction and scientific regret. Duncan Lunnan himself, the very man who created the 13,000-year-old myth, has since publicly and thoroughly disavowed his own theory. He has stated that his 1973 work was a mistake. He admits, used flawed data and had, in his own youthful enthusiasm, misinterpreted the patterns. The LDE signals, he now states, are a real phenomenon, but his translation of them was, in his own words, not valid. He had found a pattern, but it was a pattern of his own making. The message from Epsilon Boötis was an illusion, a case of pareidolia, not with a shape, but with a data set. And so, the very heart of the legend, the 13,000-year-old date, was erased by the same man who had first written it. The voice of the Black Knight had fallen silent, admitting it was never there. This leaves us with the older mysteries, the dark satellites of 1954 and 1960. Surely these were real. They were reported by the military. They were tracked on radar. They were in Time magazine. And but they were not alien. They were, in all likelihood, secret. The 1950s and 60s were the very dawn of the spy satellite era. The US was frantically and secretly trying to launch its Corona program. The Soviets were doing the same. It is, today, almost certain that the dark phantoms detected by NORAD were not alien sentinels. They were the other side's secret, unannounced, and very human spy satellites, appearing on radar as unidentified phantoms before their orbits and origins could be confirmed. The 1960 polar orbit mystery, the one that seemed so technologically impossible, it was later confirmed. The US Discoverer 8 satellite, a known part of the Corona spy program, had failed. A piece of its launch debris had been accidentally kicked into a high, strange orbit, which NORAD briefly mistook for an active, unknown craft. The dark satellite of 1960 was, just like the 1998 object, just another piece of our own junk. It was just like the 1998 object, just another piece of our own junk. And so, the legend of the Black Knight, as a single, cohesive, physical object, seems to dissolve under the clear light of examination. It is a house of cards, built from a lost blanket, a mathematical mistake, and the paranoia of the Cold War. The story, it seems, is over, but it is not, because this deconstruction, this cleaning of the slate, leaves us with the two oldest and most profound dots in the constellation. It leaves us with the true mysteries. It leaves us with the signals that started it all, the whispers that came before we had any junk in space to misidentify. What about Nikola Tesla? And what truly are the long-delayed echoes? Let us drift back to the LDEs, those ghostly signals from the 1920s. We know that Duncan Lunnon's translation was a mistake. But his mistake was one of interpretation. He did not invent the phenomenon. The LDs are real. Scientists have been measuring them and puzzling over them for nearly a century. A radio signal sent from Earth vanishes and then returns seconds later, far too late for any simple bounce off the ionosphere. If it is not a 13,000-year-old alien probe, what is it? This is, in many ways, a far more interesting and more beautiful mystery. It is a true scientific puzzle. And to this day, there is no single 100% definitive answer. There are, however, several fascinating and very real possibilities. The most widely accepted theory is that the signal never truly leaves Earth. It just gets trapped. The Earth is wrapped in a vast, complex, an invisible bubble of plasma and magnetic fields, the magnetosphere. This region is not a simple, calm shell. It is a chaotic, weather-filled place with ducts of plasma and turbulent clouds, all shaped by the solar wind. A radio signal under just the right, rare conditions could enter one of these plasma ducts and become trapped, bouncing back and forth, traveling thousands of miles in a complex loop, before finally finding a way out and returning to the receiver on the ground. The 3 to 15-second delay would simply be the travel time for this complex, looping journey within our own magnetosphere. It is an elegant and very plausible natural explanation. Another theory is that the signals are quite simply bouncing off the moon. A moon bounce, or Earth-Moon-Earth, EME communication, is something amateur radio operators do today for sport. A signal sent to the moon takes about 2.5 seconds to make the round trip. This fits some of the LDE data perfectly, but it does not explain the longer delays, the 8-second or 15-second echoes. It is an answer, but not a complete one. Other theories suggest the signals are bouncing twice, traveling perhaps from the Earth to the Moon to the other side of the Earth's magnetosphere and then back again. The truth is, no single theory perfectly and cleanly accounts for every LDE ever recorded. The phenomenon remains genuinely weird. It is a quirk of our planet's own complex electromagnetic environment. The LDEs are not an alien hello. They are the sound of our own voice, reflected back to us in a strange, distorted, and delayed whisper by the natural magnetic mirrors of our own planet. The tape recorder in the sky was not the Black Knight. It was the Earth itself, and this, in its own way, is just as wondrous. But this leaves us with the first dot, the Genesis, Nikola Tesla in 1899. He had no spy satellites to misidentify. He had no junk to photograph. And his signals were not, he claimed, echoes. They were originating from space. Rhythmic, repeating, intelligent pulses. What, in 1899, was Nikola Tesla listening to? Here we are at the intersection of genius, time, and profound cosmic chance. We must remember that in 1899, the universe was, to humanity, a silent place. We knew of light, but we did not know of radio. We did not know that the cosmos was filled, teeming with natural radio signals. We did not know what a quasar was. We did not know what a magnetar was. We did not know that the planet Jupiter itself is a colossal natural radio transmitter, its storms howling in the static. And most importantly, we did not know what a pulsar was. In 1899, with the most sensitive radio receiver on the planet, in the high, clear air of Colorado, with no interference from modern cities, Tesla had, in effect, built the world's first true radio telescope. He was the first human ever to be listening in this way. And what did he hear? Today, the scientific consensus is almost unanimous. Tesla, in his genius, had done the impossible. He had built a machine so sensitive that he was, most likely, the first human in history to detect a pulsar. These are the spinning, hyperdense, dead cores of giant stars. As they spin, they beam out incredibly precise, rhythmic pulses of radio waves, like a cosmic lighthouse. They beep with a rhythm so precise, they are more accurate than our atomic clocks. They are, for all intents and purposes, intelligent-sounding signals. They are the very definition of a rhythmic, repeating pulse from space. Tesla heard this. He had no context. He had no theory of stellar collapse. He had no word for pulsar. His brilliant mind, searching for an explanation, landed on the only one that made sense to him: intelligence. He was not wrong in what he heard. He was only wrong in its source. He was, in a very real and very profound sense, making first contact, not with Martians, but with the universe itself. He was the first to hear the clockwork of the cosmos, the rhythmic heartbeat of a dead star, whispering across the void. He was the first to hear the clockwork of the cosmos, the rhythmic heartbeat of a dead star, whispering across the void. And so, the Black Knight, as a single 13,000-year-old alien sentinel, fades. It is a ghost, a phantom, that dissolves upon inspection. The face is a blanket. The voice is a mathematical error. The body is a collection of Cold War secrets and our own forgotten junk. And the first whisper, the Genesis, is the lonely, profound, and misunderstood discovery of a natural cosmic wonder. The constellation of the myth, when we connect the dots with the clear, steady lines of science, does not draw a picture of an alien ship. It draws a picture of us. It is a self-portrait. It is a story we told ourselves about ourselves during one of the most frightening and exciting transitions in human history, our leap into space. The Black Knight is a modern myth. It is folklore for the 21st century. It is a story that, like the ancient legends of sea monsters and dragons, was born in a new, vast, and terrifyingly unknown frontier. In the 1950s and 60s, space was not the familiar, known place it is today. It was a dark, cold, and silent abyss, and we were, for the first time, tentatively, nervously, sending our tiny, fragile machines into it. And we were terrified of what we might find, or perhaps what might find us. The Black Knight legend is a perfect mirror of our own Cold War anxieties. We were in a high-stakes, paranoid conflict, and the ultimate threat was the spy in the sky, the secret, unknown object passing over our heads, watching us. The Black Knight was, in its first incarnation, the ultimate Soviet threat, a phantom satellite that we could not understand or control. And when it became clear it was not theirs, it morphed. It became something even bigger. It became the alien observer. This is, in many ways, the same psychological phenomenon we explored on the floor of the Baltic Sea. It is pareidolia, but instead of seeing a staircase in a grainy sonar image, we have created a narrative pareidolia. We have taken a series of disconnected, random, and strange events, a lost blanket, a forgotten piece of debris, an atmospheric quirk, a natural pulsar, and our pattern-seeking brains have woven them together. We have stitched them into a single, cohesive, and deeply compelling story. We have created the signal from the noise. And we did this, perhaps, because the alternative is, in its own way, just as unsettling. The truth that the sky is filled with our own junk, that our radio signals are just echoing off our own magnetic field, and that the only intelligent signals we have ever heard are the heartbeats of dead stars, is a story that is profound, but also very lonely. The legend of the Black Knight offers something else. It offers purpose. It offers meaning. It suggests that we are not just a random biological accident on an unremarkable planet. It suggests that we are being watched, that we are in some way special, that our small human story is part of a larger, grander, cosmic drama. The 13,000-year-old Sentinel is, in this sense, a strangely comforting idea. It is a watcher, a guardian. It is a technological, space-age version of an angel or a god or an ancestral spirit. It is an other that is aware of us, that is interested in us, that has been with us since our dawn. The desire to believe in the Black Knight is, at its core, the desire to not be alone. And so the legend endures. It endures even though every single piece of its evidence has been thoroughly and scientifically debunked. The story is simply better than the truth. It is more romantic, more exciting, and it speaks to a deeper, more emotional human need. The photograph of that thermal blanket is still, to this day, presented as proof, even though the astronauts who were there have explained what it is. The Lunnan translation is still cited, even though Lunnan himself has disavowed it. The myth is now self-sustaining. It has become a fact in its own right, a piece of folklore so powerful that it is impervious to the very facts that created it. It has become a modern digital ghost story. But in debunking the legend, we have not, in fact, closed the case. We have instead opened a door to a set of far more interesting and far more real questions. The Black Knight was the wrong answer, but it was pointing to the right questions. The questions that remain are we really being watched? If the Black Knight is not the Sentinel, does that mean there is no Sentinel? The search for alien watchers is not a fringe conspiracy. It is a real, sober, and fascinating field of scientific speculation. The legend of the Black Knight is just a folk version of a very real scientific hypothesis. The idea of a Bracewell probe. The idea of a Bracewell probe. This concept, proposed in 1960 by the scientist Ronald Bracewell, is in many ways far more fascinating than the Black Knight legend, because it is scientifically plausible. Bracewell was thinking about the great silence, the Fermi paradox. If the universe is full of life, why is it so quiet? He was one of the first to think about interstellar communication not as a single loud shout across the galaxy, but as a patient, quiet, and very local handshake. He argued that any truly advanced, long-lived civilization would not waste its energy-beaming high-power radio signals for millions of years to every dumb planet, hoping someone was listening. That, he argued, was inefficient. Instead, they would do what we ourselves are beginning to do. They would build autonomous, intelligent, self-repairing probes. They would send these sentinels out to promising star systems, the ones with planets in the habitable zone. These probes would not be in a hurry. They would travel for millennia powered by solar sails or fusion, and upon arriving at their destination, a planet like, say, our own, 4 billion years ago, they would find a primitive world, rich with life but with no intelligence. And so they would wait. They would place themselves in a high, stable orbit, perhaps in a gravitationally quiet place like a Lagrange point. They would go dormant, silent, observing, powered by the light of the star. They would wait for millennia, for eons, watching the slow, patient unfolding of evolution on the planet below. They would be the ultimate silent observers, and they would be waiting for one specific trigger, the moment that the planet's dominant species, the one they had been watching, finally achieved radio. The moment that primitive biological intelligence suddenly lit up the electromagnetic spectrum. That, Bracewell argued, would be the knock at the door. The probe, dormant for millennia, would detect these new artificial intelligence signals. It would wake up, and then it would be faced with a new problem: how to say hello to a species it does not know, in a language it does not understand, without causing a global panic? You would not land on their lawn. That would be too shocking. You would not send a complex mathematical message. They might not understand it. No, Bracewell argued you would do something much simpler. You would quite simply let them know you heard them. You would use their own signal. You would capture one of their radio transmissions, store it for a few moments, and then rebroadcast it back to them. The operators on the planet below would send out a ping, and then, to their complete astonishment, they would hear that exact ping echoed back at them seconds later. An impossible echo, a long-delayed echo. This was Bracewell's theory, and it is, of course, the exact phenomenon that was measured and recorded all through the 1920s and 30s. The timing is perfect. The LDEs were not just random. They began precisely when human global radio communication was becoming powerful and widespread. They happened just as our civilization was waking up electromagnetically. This, then, reframes the entire mystery. It asks a far more profound question. Was the Black Knight legend a folk story, a confused, mythological version of a real event? Were those 1920s radio operators, and perhaps even Tesla in 1899, really hearing the first hello from a silent, patient Bracewell probe, just as the theory predicted they would? This is a much harder question to answer. It is a true what if. We have a real, unexplained phenomenon, LDEs, and we have a real, plausible scientific theory, Bracewell probes, that predicts that exact phenomenon as a method of first contact. The two fit together like a lock and a key. And so we must look at the LDEs again, not as a debunked piece of the Black Knight myth, but as the potential primary evidence for a Bracewell probe. Are there other explanations? Yes. As we explored, the plasma duct theory in our own magnetosphere is the leading natural explanation. But it is not perfect. It does not cleanly explain all the delays or their semi-intelligent, repeating nature. It is a good theory, but it is not a closed case. The Bracewell hypothesis remains a dark horse, a tantalizing possibility. If it was a probe, what happened? Why did the LDEs seem to fade? Why did the conversation stop? Perhaps it did not. Perhaps we simply failed the test. Perhaps the probe sent its hello, the LDE, and it waited for a coherent, intelligent response. And all it heard back was the continued, chaotic, random noise of our global radio, a species that was too loud to understand that it was being spoken to. Perhaps, disappointed, it simply went silent again, concluding we were not yet ready. Or perhaps the conversation is still happening, but we are no longer listening in the right way. We have moved on to digital, satellite, and fiber optic communication. The old, high-power, shortwave bands of the 1920s are now relatively quiet. Are the LDs gone? Or are we just no longer in the room where the conversation was taking place? This is the true scientific what-if that the Black Knight legend, in its clumsy, folkloric way, was trying to ask. It is not about a single dark object, but about a signal that was measured, a signal that did fit the description of a first contact protocol predicted years after it was heard. This is the enduring mystery, the LGORG of the LDs. It is a whisper that has never been fully explained. It is the sound of our own voice coming back to us from the dark with an impossible delay. And we are still left to wonder, in the quiet of the night, if it was just an echo, or if someone or something was finally, after 13,000 years, saying hello back. And we are still left to wonder, in the quiet of the night, if it was just an echo, or if someone or something was finally, after 13,000 years, saying hello back. This question, are we being watched, is not a fantasy. The debunking of the Black Knight legend does not, in any way, close the book on the possibility of a sentinel. It simply forces us to be more intelligent in our search. The idea of a Bracewell probe, a patient, silent, autonomous watcher, is a serious and very real scientific hypothesis. And it has, in the modern era, become a quiet but active branch of SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. If we are to take this possibility seriously, as scientists now do, we must ask the next logical question. If there is such a probe, where would it be? The Black Knight legend, in its naivety, placed the object in a chaotic, low polar orbit. But a real probe, one designed to last for millennia, would not be there. Low Earth orbit is a messy place. It is full of our own debris, and it requires constant orbital corrections to fight atmospheric drag. It is not a place for a silent, patient, 13,000-year-old object. A real probe would be smarter. It would be quieter. It would park itself in a place that is gravitationally stable, a quiet spot in the solar system where it could remain dormant for eons without using any fuel. And our solar system, we now know, has 5 such perfect parking spots. They are called the Lagrange points. These are 5 positions in space where the gravitational pull of the Earth and the Sun and the orbital motion of the system all combine to create a perfect, stable pocket. An object placed at one of these points will, for the most part, stay there. 2 of these points, in particular known as L4 and L5, are famously stable. They form an equilateral triangle with the Earth and the Sun, one leading the Earth in its orbit and one trailing it. These are the gravitational sweet spots of our system. And this is where a true Bracewell probe would likely be. Not in our backyard, but in our gravitational shadow, hiding in plain sight. And so, in the modern era, scientists are looking. This is not a UFO hunt. It is a sober, difficult astronomical search. Astronomers in recent years have begun to systematically scan the L4 and L5 Lagrange points, not just for natural trapped Trojan asteroids, but for anything that looks wrong. They are searching for non-terrestrial artifacts. What would they look for? Not a large, black angular ship, but perhaps a small object with an unusual orbit. An object that perhaps reflects sunlight in a strange way, suggesting it is made of artificial, non-rocky materials. Or, most compellingly, an object that is emitting a tiny, faint, but measurable infrared waste heat signature, the telltale sign of a dormant, but still powered piece of technology. This is the lurker hypothesis, the idea that we are co-orbiting the sun, right now with a silent alien artifact, a lurker that is just watching. And what have we found? So far, the same answer we found in the deep rock and in the Baltic Sea. Silence. The L4 and L5 points appear, for now, to be empty of any obvious artificial signals. But the search has only just begun. The Lagrange points are not points. They are vast, voluminous, three-dimensional regions of space. A small, dark, dormant probe would be the tiniest needle in a cosmic haystack. But what if it's not at L4 or L5? What if the probe chose an even better archive? A more stable platform, one with a perfect, unchanging view of the Earth, a place where it could wait for millennia, shielded from the solar wind and micrometeorites. What if it is on the moon? The moon is the perfect bedtime mystery. It is our oldest companion, our silent, pale, and familiar friend. But it is also a 4.5 billion-year-old archive. It has no atmosphere, no wind, no rain, no erosion. A footprint left there will last for 1 million years. And a probe landed there 13,000 years ago or 1 million years ago would be pristine. It would be waiting. The far side of the moon, the side that never faces Earth, would be the most perfect and most logical place for a watcher to hide. It would be permanently shielded from our planet's own noisy, chaotic radio screaming. It could listen with perfect clarity to the universe and observe us undetected. Is this just a fantasy? Well, we are, for the first time in history, looking. Our orbiters, like the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter LRO, have been mapping the entire surface of the moon in breathtaking, high resolution. We have photographed the Apollo landing sites, and we can see the tiny, discarded landers, the rovers, even the footprints left by the astronauts. We have a map, and so scientists have begun to use this map for lunar archaeology. They are scanning these high-resolution images, not just for geological features, but for anomalies. They are looking for a strange, geometric shadow, a glint of unnatural, non-rocky metal, a dot that does not match the surrounding geology. And again, so far, the answer has been silence. The moon, it seems, is just as quiet as the Lagrange points. But the moon is vast. A small, dormant probe, perhaps covered in 13,000 years of fine, gray regolith dust, would be invisible even to our sharpest eyes. It would be just one more shadow in a landscape of shadows. And so the search must change. If we cannot see the lurker, perhaps we can, once again, try to listen to it. The Black Knight legend was, at its heart, a story of signals. And it is in the signals that the true modern search continues. And it is in the signals that the true modern search continues. The Black Knight, as a legend, was a story of misinterpretation. We heard the heartbeat of a pulsar and thought it was a message. We saw a lost blanket and thought it was a ship. The real challenge, the one that scientists face right now, is this: how do we make sure we are not making the exact same mistake all over again? How do we listen for a hello from a true, silent, patient probe and distinguish it from the endless, chaotic, natural noise of the cosmos? The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or SETI, has become far more subtle than it was in the 1960s. We are no longer just pointing a single, large radio dish at a nearby star, hoping to overhear an alien television broadcast. We have begun to realize that this is like standing in the middle of a vast, dark forest, shouting, and hoping to hear another shout in reply. The real sentinels, the Bracewell probes, would not be shouting. They would be whispering, or perhaps they would be flashing a light. This is the great new frontier of the search, optical SETI. The realization that for an advanced civilization, radio is a messy, inefficient, and slow way to communicate across the void. A far better, faster, and more precise way is with light, a focused, powerful, laser-like pulse, a flash of light that, for a single brilliant instant, could outshine its own parent star. Such a pulse, sent from a probe in our own solar system, would be an unmistakable and highly efficient hello. It would be the modern digital equivalent of the 1920s long-delayed echoes. And so, in the modern era, we are no longer just listening with radio telescopes. We are watching with robotic ones. All across the world, automated telescopes are now dedicated to optical SETI, staring at the night sky, looking not for radio beeps, but for a single impossibly brief, unnatural flash of light. They are looking for the glint of a probe's laser, the hello sent in a language of photons. And this new search brings with it a new and far more profound problem. Our modern automated sky surveys, like the Pan-STARRS system in Hawaii or the upcoming Vera C. Rubin Observatory, are not just single telescopes. They are monsters. They are machines designed to photograph the entire visible sky every single night, over and over. They are creating an unprecedented, massive terabyte-a-night flood of data. They are designed to find anything that changes, moves, or flashes. They are, in effect, the perfect watcher for a watcher. But in this flood of data, they find thousands of flashes every single night. Supernovae exploding in distant galaxies, asteroids tumbling, catching the sun, variable stars, natural, cosmic noise. If a real alien probe sitting in a Lagrange point or on the moon were to flash its hello laser at us tonight, what would we see? We would see a single new dot of light appearing where there was no dot before, and our automated scientific software would probably and quite calmly catalog it. It would be given a designation, Transient Object 2025 XYZ. It would be classified as a possible flare star or an unusual asteroid glint. And then the system would move on, searching for the next flash. The true terror, the modern equivalent of the Black Knight's misinterpretation, is not that we will fail to see the signal. It is that we are already seeing it, and we are, in our overwhelming flood of data, simply filing it away as noise. The challenge is no longer about finding the needle in the haystack. The challenge is that we are now, for the first time, collecting the entire haystack every single night, and we have to find the one single unnatural stalk of hay. How do you do that? How do you teach a machine to find a signal that you have never seen before? This is the very real what if that has replaced the Black Knight legend. What if the LDEs were the first contact signal, a simple analog hello for a simple analog species in the 1920s? And what if now, in our digital age, the probe is sending a new digital hello, a laser pulse, and we are just missing it? We are filtering it out. We are, in our own scientific brilliance, too smart to see the anomaly right in front of us. This is the search for SETI in our own backyard. It is the hunt for non-terrestrial artifacts within our solar system. Scientists are now actively proposing new ways to look. They are suggesting that we look for objects that don't move in a natural Keplerian orbit, objects that are perhaps very faintly accelerating or decelerating in a way that rock should not. They are suggesting we look for objects that reflect sunlight in a way that is flat, like a solar sail, not lumpy, like a spinning asteroid. They are, in short, looking for the exact same kinds of anomalies that the Black Knight legend was based on, but this time with real, precise, and sober science. The spirit of the search is the same. The desire to find the watcher is the same. Only the tools have changed. And so, the legend of the Black Knight, in the end, has been incredibly useful. It was a failure as a fact, but it was a profound success as a story. It was a ghost story that forced us to look at our own house, our own solar system, in a new way. It forced us to ask, are we sure we are alone in this room? And in asking that question, we have now finally begun to build the tools to seriously and scientifically look under the bed and check in the dark corners. The legend has died, but the true search, the real scientific hunt for the 13,000-year-old sentinel, has, in a strange and beautiful way, only just begun. And this new, real hunt is, in many ways, far more difficult than the legend ever imagined. Our modern, sober, scientific search for a sentinel is itself based on a crucial assumption. We are assuming that the object wants to be found. The entire concept of a Bracewell probe with its hello in the form of an LDE or a laser flash is the assumption of an interactive intelligence. It is a search for a greeter. But what if this is the wrong assumption? What if the watcher is not a greeter? What if its primary function is not to contact us, but simply to observe us silently and without interference? What if its one inviolable primary directive is to never be found? This is a different and perhaps more chilling possibility. This is not a Bracewell probe. This is a sentinel. And this brings us back, in a strange circular way, to the name of the original legend, the Black Knight. The thermal blanket in the 1998 photograph was, of course, black. But what if the legend, in its folk wisdom, accidentally got the most important detail right? What if the defining characteristic of a true, ancient, alien probe is its invisibility, its darkness? If you were an advanced civilization and you wanted to plant a multimillennial observer in a primitive solar system, you would not build it out of shiny, reflective metal. You would not have it flash bright, hello lights. You would build it to be the perfect spy. You would build it to be black. You would coat it in the most advanced stealth technology imaginable. Not just the radar-absorbing paint of our primitive stealth bombers, but perhaps a layer of metamaterials that could absorb or bend 99.999% of all electromagnetic radiation, from visible light to radio waves to radar. It would be, for all intents and purposes, a true black hole in space. It would be invisible to our telescopes, invisible to our radar. It would be a null signature object. It would have only one unavoidable physical property, mass. It would have a gravitational shadow. We would never see it, but we just might, be able to detect its presence by the tiny, tiny gravitational nudge it gives to other nearby objects. This is a search that is almost beyond our current capabilities. It is the search for a ghost. And where would this perfect ghost hide? Not in the obvious L4 or L5 points, which we are already beginning to scan. That is where a greeter would be. A true sentinel would be somewhere smarter, somewhere we are not looking. Perhaps it is in a vast, distant, graveyard orbit, far out beyond the orbit of Neptune, a place where the sunlight is almost non-existent. Or perhaps it is in a bizarre, highly eccentric, comet-like orbit designed to look perfectly natural, swinging in close to the Earth only once every few thousand years, masquerading as a natural icy object before disappearing again into the deep dark. Or perhaps, most chillingly, it is exactly where the legend said it was, in a polar orbit, but not a single object. Perhaps it is a swarm of microscopic, dust-sized nanoprobes, scattered in a vast, thin cloud, invisibly tasting our upper atmosphere, utterly indistinguishable from natural micrometeorites. The possibilities are as vast as the darkness itself. And this brings us, finally, to the date, the 13,000-year number. We know now that Duncan Lunnan retracted this. He admitted his calculations were a mistake. He found a pattern that was not there. And so, scientifically, that number is meaningless. It is an artifact of a failed hypothesis. And yet, in the quiet of this exploration, we cannot help but feel the poetry of that number, the strange, coincidental perfection of it. 13,000 years ago, why did Lunnan's mistake land on that number? 13,000 years ago is not a random date. It is perhaps the single most important and most mysterious turning point in the entire history of our species. It is the end of the last ice age. It is the beginning of the Younger Dryas, a period of catastrophic climate change. And it is precisely the dawn of human civilization. It is the moment right around that time that the first strange revolutionary stones of Göbekli Tepe were being raised in Turkey. The moment that hunter-gatherers were, for the first time, settling down, looking at the stars in a new way, and beginning the long, slow journey towards agriculture, cities, and consciousness as we know it. If you were an advanced alien intelligence sending a probe to watch the rise of a promising species, that is the moment you would be interested in. You would not care about the billions of years of silent, slow biological evolution. You would care about the spark, the moment that the animal became human, the moment we began to build, to dream, to chart the stars. The Black Knight legend, in its clumsy, accidental way, placed its watcher at the exact birth of the very thing it was supposedly sent to watch. This is perhaps the greatest coincidence of all, and it leaves us with a final, profound, and truly bedtime question. The Black Knight satellite, the 13,000-year-old alien object, is a myth. But the question it asks, the one that Lunnan's mistake accidentally uncovered, is the most important one of all. Is it just a coincidence? Is it just a cosmic, random chance that our civilization, our entire human story, began 13,000 years ago? Or was that dawn of consciousness witnessed? Was there a silent observer, a true Black Knight, that was present at our birth? We will never, perhaps, be able to answer that. But the search for it, the act of looking up and wondering, changes us. It connects our own small, modern lives to the very deepest, oldest, and most profound questions of our own origin. And we are still left to wonder, in the quiet of the night, if it was just an echo, or if someone or something was finally, after 13,000 years, saying hello back. This question, are we being watched, is not a fantasy. The debunking of the Black Knight legend does not, in any way, close the book on the possibility of a sentinel. It simply forces us to be more intelligent in our search. The idea of a Bracewell probe, a patient, silent, autonomous watcher, is a serious and very real scientific hypothesis. And it has, in the modern era, become a quiet but active branch of SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. If we are to take this possibility seriously, as scientists now do, we must ask the next logical question. If there is such a probe, where would it be? The Black Knight legend, in its naivety, placed the object in a chaotic, low polar orbit. But a real probe, one designed to last for millennia, would not be there. Low Earth orbit is a messy place. It is full of our own debris, and it requires constant orbital corrections to fight atmospheric drag. It is not a place for a silent, patient, 13,000-year-old object. A real probe would be smarter. It would be quieter. It would park itself in a place that is gravitationally stable, a quiet spot in the solar system where it could remain dormant for eons without using any fuel. And our solar system, we now know, has 5 such perfect parking spots. They are called the Lagrange points. These are 5 positions in space where the gravitational pull of the Earth and the Sun and the orbital motion of the system all combine to create a perfect, stable pocket. An object placed at one of these points will, for the most part, stay there. 2 of these points, in particular known as L4 and L5, are famously stable. They form an equilateral triangle with the Earth and the Sun, one leading the Earth in its orbit and one trailing it. These are the gravitational sweet spots of our system, and this is where a true Bracewell probe would likely be. Not in our backyard, but in our gravitational shadow, hiding in plain sight. And so, in the modern era, scientists are looking. This is not a UFO hunt. It is a sober, difficult astronomical search. Astronomers in recent years have begun to systematically scan the L4 and L5 Lagrange points, not just for natural trapped Trojan asteroids, but for anything that looks wrong. They are searching for non-terrestrial artifacts. What would they look for? Not a large, black angular ship, but perhaps a small object with an unusual orbit. An object that perhaps reflects sunlight in a strange way, suggesting it is made of artificial, non-rocky materials. Or, most compellingly, an object that is emitting a tiny, faint, but measurable infrared waste heat signature, the telltale sign of a dormant, but still powered piece of technology. This is the lurker hypothesis, the idea that we are co-orbiting the sun, right now with a silent alien artifact, a lurker that is just watching. And what have we found? So far, the same answer we found in the deep rock and in the Baltic Sea. Silence. The L4 and L5 points appear, for now, to be empty of any obvious artificial signals. But the search has only just begun. The Lagrange points are not points. They are vast, voluminous, three-dimensional regions of space. A small, dark, dormant probe would be the tiniest needle in a cosmic haystack. But what if it's not at L4 or L5? What if the probe chose an even better archive? A more stable platform, one with a perfect, unchanging view of the Earth, a place where it could wait for millennia, shielded from the solar wind and micrometeorites. What if it is on the moon? The moon is the perfect bedtime mystery. It is our oldest companion, our silent, pale, and familiar friend. But it is also a 4.5 billion-year-old archive. It has no atmosphere, no wind, no rain, no erosion. A footprint left there will last for 1 million years. And a probe landed there 13,000 years ago or 1 million years ago would be pristine. It would be waiting. The far side of the moon, the side that never faces Earth, would be the most perfect and most logical place for a watcher to hide. It would be permanently shielded from our planet's own noisy, chaotic radio screaming. It could listen with perfect clarity to the universe and observe us undetected. Is this just a fantasy? Well, we are, for the first time in history, looking. Our orbiters, like the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter LRO, have been mapping the entire surface of the moon in breathtaking, high resolution. We have photographed the Apollo landing sites, and we can see the tiny, discarded landers, the rovers, even the footprints left by the astronauts. We have a map, and so scientists have begun to use this map for lunar archaeology. They are scanning these high-resolution images, not just for geological features, but for anomalies. They are looking for a strange, geometric shadow, a glint of unnatural, non-rocky metal, a dot that does not match the surrounding geology. And again, so far, the answer has been silence. The moon, it seems, is just as quiet as the Lagrange points. But the moon is vast. A small, dormant probe, perhaps covered in 13,000 years of fine, gray regolith dust, would be invisible even to our sharpest eyes. It would be just one more shadow in a landscape of shadows. And so the search must change. If we cannot see the lurker, perhaps we can, once again, try to listen to it. The Black Knight legend was, at its heart, a story of signals. And it is in the signals that the true modern search continues. And so we are left with that final, profound, and perhaps unanswerable question. Was our dawn 13,000 years ago witnessed? We have drifted far on this journey, from the first strange whispers in Tesla's lab to the grainy, misidentified photographs in Earth's orbit. We have followed the legend, and then, with the gentle light of science, we have watched it dissolve piece by piece. The Black Knight, the 13,000-year-old sentinel, is, in the end, a ghost. It is a story we told ourselves, a beautiful, compelling, and perhaps necessary story. A story born from the noise of our own new technologies, the fear of our own new wars, and the profound, deep human need to not be alone in the dark. The thermal blanket has burned up in the atmosphere. The radar blips have been identified as our own debris. The star map has been retracted by its own author. All the physical dots have vanished. But the constellation they drew, the story itself, has not. That is the real artifact. The Black Knight legend is the true, non-terrestrial object. It is a piece of modern folklore, a cultural satellite of our own making, and it is still in orbit. It will likely remain there for a very long time, whispering to us about our hopes and our anxieties. But in debunking the legend, we have not been left with less. We have been left with more. We have been left with the real mysteries, which are far more vast and far more wondrous. We are left with the genuine, unexplained puzzle of the long-delayed echoes. We are left with the profound, cosmic poetry of Nikola Tesla, the first human to accidentally hear the rhythmic heartbeat of a dead star. And we are left with the very real, very sober scientific search for lurkers in our Lagrange points and archaeology on our own moon. The legend forced us to ask the right questions, even if it gave us the wrong answer. This journey, in the end, was never really about it. It was about us. It was a way to look at our own reflection in the dark, polished mirror of the void. We went looking for a 13,000-year-old watcher, and in doing so, we were forced to look at our own 13,000-year-old dawn. We were forced to appreciate the profound, almost impossible journey we have taken from those first mystified hunter-gatherers to a species that can not only look up at the stars, but listen to them, touch them, and perhaps one day understand them. And so, our exploration of this specific question must come to a close. The black night is not in our sky, but the mystery is. The silence we hear from space is not empty. It is just patient. It is filled with the light of distant, natural wonders, and perhaps with questions that we are not yet ready to answer. For tonight, we can look up at that same familiar dark sky and know that while we may not be watched, we are, in a very real sense, part of it. We are the universe in a brief, passing moment of awareness, asking questions about itself. Thank you for joining this quiet exploration of the whispers in the sky. We have drifted through this long story, and now we have reached its end. May your own thoughts be deep and your own silence be peaceful. Good night.